Alrighty, so today I'm going to be doing a really deep breakdown of Rey Green. I've been playing this deck quite a bit, been enjoying it. Started off with kind of the premise that I wanted to find a way to play Concord, Dawn, and Bright Hope in a deck because those cards are very good into what may be the top deck in the meta right now, which is Django Tarkentown. So opted for Rey, started playing around, liked it, decided let's do a guide on this. As always, my lists, they're fluid, they change. What you're going to see on the screen here is going to be published. The link will be in the description. But I make edits to decks routinely. Those show up on my Patreon. So if you're looking for a little more deep dive on some stuff, a little more extra content, you can check it out there. As well, please subscribe if you haven't to the YouTube channel, and it helps out a ton. All right, so let's get started. First question is why Rey? I find Rey's experience ability to be quite powerful, frankly. It's just proven to be quite useful. It makes a lot of little units much more impactful. Things, especially early in the game, it changes math quite well. I find it a little easier to use than Luke's ability. I think she compares pretty nicely with Luke in general because they're both 6 cost, force, blue, heroism leaders. They both have a 1 cost ability that kind of buffs a unit. I think a shield is probably more innately powerful than an experience, but Luke's restriction being that you have to play the unit first and then shield it, or you can never do it, right? Luke kind of forces you to play off curve if you ever wanted to use his ability, while Rey, you can still just pump those units on a different turn. You can sequence her ability first and then play a unit, for instance. I find it a little more user-friendly. And in general, I think the math that she helps with helps a lot, especially when you're playing a lot of Sentinels. I think the early 1-drops that you can play with Rey in a variety of different colors help out a lot with her ability. Additionally, another thing I really like about Rey is just how good her stabilizing is. Restore 3 is nuts. She can kind of pivot pretty quickly with that restore. You can start racing in a lot of situations because of that restore. So although her stats aren't great, her abilities just create a pretty good package. And then the other reason why Rey, I mean, it's not Rey specific, is just blue hero specific. Luke might be the best card or one of the best cards in the game just on pure power. So finding ways to get Luke Skywalker into your deck is always a nice thing. Always looking for the next best heroism blue deck so that you can jam 3 copies of this card and let it kind of carry you. And then why green? So green has not usually been the typical Rey color. It was played primarily as a red deck, sometimes as a mono blue deck. But green, I think, was being held a lot back by Boba in the previous set, just being this like generic hero mid-range deck without either being able to like cheat with things like force throw or like low cost vigilance. Rey wasn't able to really like capitalize on the powerful stuff in green. But I think right now the main draws for me are number 1, Bright Hope. Bright Hope is very good into Django decks, especially when you have redundant powerful Sentinels, and we get Concord Dawn as well. The other thing we get here is Ramp. Ramp is strong. Ramp in general is just a powerful thing to be doing in this game. You are able to catch back up on tempo a lot when you ramp in decks because hero deploys are free. It's really the main way Ramp is able to catch back up from taking a turn off. And lastly, Home 1, one of the best heroism finishers in the game. It's a very powerful card. This card can also bring back Sentinels in this deck, both on ground and in space, right? You get Village Protectors and Concord Dawn. So it's a very good stabilizing force. Added into that restore theme that Rey decks tend to have. It's very powerful. So that's how I've opted into green. You'll see here I'm not playing Energy Conversion Lab, which is rare for me when I'm playing green decks, but there really isn't any card in this deck that I really wanted to play that really capitalizes on an Energy Conversion Lab. I certainly think you can pivot into some powerful 5 and 6 cost units that utilize that ambush well, but it's just not how I'm building this deck right now. All right, here's the list. As always, like I said, subject to change. This is how it looks today, but it might not look like this tomorrow. But there's some really cool things going on here. We'll kind of break it down into packages a little bit. Like our turn 1 plays, we got 11 of them, 3 R2s, 3 Clone Deserters. Those are 1-drops that you can pump on the first turn. Quite powerful, right? And R2 becomes a 2/5. The Clone Deserter is a 3/4 restore one. It's just a very useful unit. We have Restored Arc. I think that card is just pretty important in general. It can help with all this space aggression stuff. Just trade it off when needed. It can also get pumped as well. Got Regional Governor here as well. I got a whole section dedicated to this later, so we'll talk about it there. As far as ramp, I am playing 3 Resupplies and 2 Spark of Hopes. Spark of Hope is usually pretty clunky, but I kind of like it here, mainly because our 5 resource turn is actually not great. In general, we don't play 5 drops. There aren't really any I want to play. It usually involves either playing 2 cards or playing some like a 4 cost and a pump with Rey. Rey is able to fill our curve up pretty well with her ability, but I think because we're such a unit dense deck, especially low costed units and Sentinels, we kind of force our opponent to defeat our units. We're playing in such a way that they need, because we have Restore and Sentinels, they kind of need to bump into our stuff. And I think you can set up quite a powerful 5 resource turn with Spark of Hope, playing, and then chaining that with like another Sentinel, like a 3-drop, or like a Yoda or Sundari, and then flipping Rey on that turn if you were able to ramp. So we're gonna go a little deeper into ramp in this deck. Of course, if you look at the top end with Luke, U-Wing, Redemptions, and Home Ones, it's nice to be able to get up there a little quicker. In the 3-drop spot, we got a lot of them. Playing the full package of the Sentinels, 3 Concord, 3 Village Protectors. Village Protectors is incredible. That card is so good in so many matchups. I've also opted for 2 Sundaris. And I think there's... Yeah, sorry. Got cut off there. 2 Yodas as well. They were in the top right. I thought for a second that I had forgotten to put them in the deck. So 2 Sundaris, 2 Yodas. Kind of went the split there. I think Sundari is obviously just like a better brawler. Yoda is better in like an attrition game because of the draw. So kind of split the difference. I got 1 main deck tech for grinding games. And then as for like the removal package, we got 2 Takedown, 2 Perilous, 2 Felda Dragons. That in conjunction with the fact that we bash units into units a ton. We've got Luke's to clean up later in the game. The removal package has felt pretty solid. Bright Hope, talked about it. One of the most important things to be doing right now is chaining like Concords into Bright Hopes, really just gumming up the sky as much as possible, preventing as much as damage as possible, because, you know, later we're going to be playing Rey, we're going to be restoring a lot, we're going to be chaining into Luke's and Redemptions and Home Ones. We're going to be able to stabilize through the sheer power of the top end and the restore into aggressive decks, so we're just going into mitigation. And then I've also put 2 Jedi lightsabers here. They're quite good on Rey herself, but also pretty solid on low-cost units, especially into like Sabine, where you can really just kind of brick the ground for quite a few turns because of like a Jedi lightsaber R2 or something. So I've been pretty happy with the lightsaber. The sideboard I'll talk about later. We'll talk about strategy and sideboarding towards the end. All right, so a big theme with Rey is playing off curve. We do that, obviously, because her ability kind of turns a lot of these units into, like, above rate, right? If R2 was a 2-cost 2/5, we would be playing that card in basically every deck, right? Same with, like, the Clone Deserter. It'd be a 2-cost 3/4. So we embrace the fact that we're probably losing initiative by doing this, by getting slightly above rate units. It can also pump all these Sentinels, right? Village Protectors, Concord Dawns, Bright Hopes. Often you'll actually wait to play off curve. You'll do Concord on the 4 resource turn so you can turn it into a 2/5, because a 2/5 Concord can survive something like a P38, right? Because it can attack and ping, but it will no longer be able to kill the Concord Dawn. The Bright Hope as well, you can get it up to 7 health. It's quite powerful to be able to have your Sentinels also like trade back or push damage. Sandaris. I didn't even include Yoda here. Like, all these units become much more powerful, and it also lets you kind of action churn a little bit, so you don't have to commit to the board. You get to pump, you get to play a unit, or you can play a unit and then pump. You can always kind of game it in such a way that you know what you're going to need to trade into, right? So you need that 3 damage to kill their 3. You pump first, right? If you're just looking for mitigation, you can Sentinel, and you don't even have to pump the unit that you play that turn, right? That's the issue I find with Luke, is that the shield only works on the unit that you play that turn. Regional Governor as well. I think these 1/4s, they're typically really dangerous to play into Tarkin Town decks, which are all over the place because they tend to ping with something and then Tarkin Town. But all these units, you can put them up to 5 health, which again kind of bricks the Tarkin Town play. All right, so big theme of this deck, it's restore and stall, right? We play a lot of Sentinels, and a lot of our units restore, right? We got Sandari, Yoda, Restored Art, Clone Deserter. It's not even to include later in the game where we have Rey and Luke restoring. And then our Sentinels as well. Didn't even put Village Protectors here, but Bright Hope and Concord in space. Ewing reinforcements can often double Sentinel. I think, honestly, we look for Luke a lot with that card, but being able to Sentinel ground in space with 1 action is quite powerful. Redemption, of course, is the biggest burst heal we can get, and it's another space Sentinel. So it's a lot about just mitigating damage and then turning the corner. And turning the corner means you don't always have to trade into units once you've kind of stabilized. Your restore forces your opponents to actually kill your units once you've stabilized, because you're going to race them, right? Ramping. So ramp, I don't have a ton to say about ramp. Certain matchups, it's going to be way less good, although in a lot of cases, a turn 2 resupply is quite powerful, lets you go into 5 resources, meaning you can do like unit plus pump much more effectively and get to that Rey stabilization much earlier. And the Spark of Hope is mainly there for the 5 resource turn, although it's not always the point, right? But being able to Spark plus 3 drop and flip Rey on the same turn is quite powerful. There's more Spark of Hope utility and something very important for a very specific matchup, which we'll talk about later. All right, the flip turn itself. Village Protector is my favorite card to play on the flip turn. You lead with it. It's very difficult for decks to get through it efficiently and quickly enough. It makes Rey's flip much easier. Of course, the Obi-Wan into Rey flip is also very good if you can ensure that Obi-Wan won't get one shot, because getting those experience counters on Rey is really powerful. But I usually like doing a Rey flip turn with smaller cards. Things like a Village Protector and a Lightsaber is great, or even like a Village Protector plus a 2-drop plus a Rey pump into a flip, right? You get lots of actions to churn out before you need to flip. You get that Rey out, you can start healing for 3 every turn pretty effectively. So the Rey flip, yeah, I like to look for little cards. I don't want to always just play the biggest thing I have, like Obi-Wan, although if the coast is clear, Obi-Wan is also a very good card to play that turn. All right, turning the corner. So I kind of got to that a little quicker than I intended to, but yes, the main thing you want to do, like, this isn't the kind of deck that you want to just like forever be trading units. Although it does have a very good top end, it's not as good as a lot of decks, and a lot of decks can like outburn you, especially things like Django and Sabine, right? Like, you need to actually start presenting them with a clock as well. So you get to the point where if you're in like a decent life situation, your restore is more like it. You're trading, for instance, Rey is a 6 damage life swing, right? Luke is a 9 damage life swing. You don't always need to be clearing units if your restore is going to outrace them. And that's something you need to keep track of. But like, so many of the units in this deck heal that it's pretty good at turning that corner into aggressive decks to start trying to close the game so that they can't top deck into ways to finish you off. All right, a little bit on Regional Governor. So the 3 cards underneath it, Battlefield Marine, Moisture Farmer, Warrior Drone, these are things that you can look to play actually instead of Regional Governor if you haven't felt like you're getting good value out of the Governor. I think the card is just pretty solid. It's pretty easy to protect it right now. A lot of decks are not trying to like attack into your units a lot of the time, especially aggro decks. And I think it just so happens that decks like Sabine and Django have very specific important cards that kind of make pivot turns for them. Triple Dark Raider or Ruthless Raider are basically the pivot cards for a Django deck. Naming Ruthless Raider actually also just makes the Triple Dark Raid so much worse. That's usually what I would name there. And into Sabine, of course, it's the units like Poe and Wrecker that really flip the game because of the Energy Conversion Lab. And Regional Governor coming down and being able to block that can be quite effective. Of course, into control decks, on certain turns it can be useful, especially like a Super Laser Blast. Remember, this can come off of U-Wing, which is nice that you can just U-Wing into like this plus a couple other units. But I do understand that like it's not a very effective board or tempo oriented card, and a much safer or cleaner thing to play is just like Battlefield Marine. It's just like a good unit, or even Moisture Farmer or the Warrior Drone. But I wanted to call out Regional Governor. You need to really have a good understanding of like what the important cards are in like the matchups you're playing to get and start getting comfortable with what to do with this card, because it's not always like the rule of thumb. Yeah, like Ruthless Raider is often what you want to call, but it's not always what you're going to want to call into like a Django deck, and it's going to really depend on what you see. Like even in Django, like potentially naming the Vamprace Flamethrower could be a solid card, because Django won't be able to just like exhaust your whole board when he attacks, which is a really big issue when all your units are trying to restore to keep up with the space aggression. So you gotta like, it's the kind of card that I would say, like, if you're first picking up this deck and you're not yet comfortable with matchups, you haven't played it enough into all the matchups, it's probably not the card I would recommend slotting in. I think it's just once you have a really good idea of how this deck plays into a bunch of different matchups, that's when the card becomes much more powerful. All right, the current sideboard, again, subject to change, but 3 top targets. I put 3 of these in most blue decks. I just think they are very powerful into Sabine and probably even into Django decks at this point. Just a lot of healing. I have the 3rd Spark of Hope and 2 more techs, so we're going to go to 3 of each of them. We'll talk about that in a second. 3 Scanning Officer is a concession to the fact that I think blue-green hero mid-range decks have a very big mono-yellow Han issue. They're just very slow. They have very few ways to mitigate a powerful Han flip turn and getting DJ'd out of games. Scanning Officer is one of the best cards against mono-yellow Han. So this is a pure silver bullet kind of situation. It's the best sideboard card against that matchup. And because I think that matchup is difficult, and because I think a lot of good players in general at tournaments sometimes gravitate towards that deck, that I've decided currently, let's go with this. But again, if you don't expect to be bumping into mono yellow Han, you have no business putting this in your sideboard. And then lastly, the 3rd home 1. It's for basically anything non-aggro-y. Like if you're playing into any mid-range or control deck, we're just going to want the extra home 1. All right, so why are we going to 3 tech and 3 Spark of Hope? So another potentially tricky matchup for this deck, because it does not close games very quickly. It's playing a lot of like low powery units that are meant to like grind at games. This deck can have issues with hard control decks. Think Bosk Blue, Mono Blue Iden, decks like that, right? So in those matchups, we're focusing on, for Spark of Hope, not to be early ramp. It's mostly to be a buyback for tech. We want to tax so much of the removal so that we can bury them in cards. And tech is one of the best ways to do that, letting us, of course, play a bunch of extra cards. But they will generally just be able to remove tech. And what we do when they remove tech is we spark it back into our resource row. We generally don't play tech unless we can spark it back. That's just how we want to maneuver this matchup. We got 3 of each. We have essentially or potentially 6 copies of tech because of that, and that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to bury them late in the game, push as much damage. We have other decent grindy cards like U-Wing and Home 1, right? Those cards tax removal as well. Matchup can be difficult, but this kind of solution helps specifically for those hard control matchups. Although there are some other places like into mid-rangey decks, I would also probably board in the Tex and the Spark, but I'd be less concerned about specifically saving the Spark of Hope for the tech loop. In those cases, just general ramping works quite efficiently. All right, as I like to do at the end of most of these guides is talk about cards that are not currently in the deck that I would consider. So some of them you saw already, like Moisture Farmer, Warrior Drone. Those are like 1-drops that can get buffed by Rey on the first turn. I mean, Warrior Drone is just R2 without the R2 ability. It's just less good, but it's still fine. And Moisture Farmer, being that redundant restore, can also be good. Battlefield Marine is another early game unit. Just does not work at all with anything Rey is doing, but of course it trades with basically any 2-drop on the ground. Confiscate, that would be the upgrade hate of choice if we needed it. Entrenched is another interesting card, especially playing it on some of our Sentinels. Admiral Akbar, a little bit of cool removal there, built into a deck that plays a lot of units on the ground. He's usually underperformed for me, but I come back to it a little bit now and again. Captain Typho can give anything Sentinel. Now, we have so much Sentinel anyway that I haven't yet felt like I needed it, but definitely an option. Hu Yang's a really cool card, especially when you can buff Sentinels and just make your opponent need to kill him, right? It takes precious time. Razor Crest is a nice card to start looping things like Perilous Position and top targets, and even the Jedi Lightsaber. So it's a nice attrition-based card. Nima Outpost would be the next best ground Sentinel, in my opinion. So if we wanted even more on the ground there, that would be a cool include. Satine, I haven't tried it. It's just going to be on the back burner for now, but this might be the kind of deck that can decide to go a different route when trying to play an attrition game and just put in Satine, have a bunch of Sentinels, and just try to like delete an opponent's deck real quick. I think it's certainly something worth considering. Instead of maybe that tech Spark of Hope stuff, maybe we just do Satine and play more really annoyingly difficult units like Nima Outpost, right? Like these cards are annoying for something like a Boss Blue deck to remove. They don't hit any breakpoints for Takedown or Fell the Dragon or Open Fire or Force Choke. It just means more work for them to get through it. And although they all are trying to mill you too, you're actually probably going to be or mill means defeat your opponent's deck. But yes, in case they can use Satine's ability as well, but they don't play that many units. So in that case, I think Satine's ability is much more powerful for the Rey player. Traitorous is another interesting potential include. Vanquish and Rival's Fall as well. I think Vanquish, I'm keeping my eyes on this one because of the fact that it can defeat Ruthless Raiders, unlike Takedown and Fell the Dragon, which don't. Rival's Fall as well. If we needed more leader-based removal, I don't think most decks right now are really that leader-focused. So I currently would probably play Vanquish before Rival's Fall, but I think there's potential for both of them. And Choose Sides as well is another very interesting card. We do play a bunch of like little units towards that. Choose Sides could potentially be a pretty big blowout. Less so into probably like harder control decks where they tend to clean up our board pretty efficiently, but more into like bigger mid-range or softer control strategies. And then Chewbacca is another decent finisher. The Smuggle is very difficult to pull off because it's red, but I think even just as an 8-cost big unit is another pretty good mid-range mirror breaker. All right. So yeah, that one was, short and sweet, I think. I've been enjoying this deck. Like I said, I started with Rey Green because I wanted a deck with 3 Concord Dawns and 3 Bright Hopes. That was the premise. Those were the first 6 cards, and then I thought Herschel was probably the most appropriate for playing that kind of strategy. If you want live updates to this deck, as well as a bunch of other lists and live updates to them, do check out the Patreon. And then in the works here, don't have a timetable yet, but these are a few things that I'm working on and hope that at some point I'll be able to get some videos on, be Akira Green update. Been working on a Chancellor Palpatine Blue, as well as a Quinlan Tarkin Town, and a bunch of other things. So no guarantee these will be next in line, but they're some of the things on the top of the agenda right now. All right. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, take care.